After completing all the major poets of romantic period, starting from Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge, Keats, Lamb, William Blake, who is considered to be a pre-romantic poet. Now let us enter into the famous novelist during romantic period. So the romantic period is a very important area in your NVS and KVS examination point of view. After completion of Shakespeare works, we are going to complete romantic period. Now when you prepare for romantic period, you have to concentrate about the literary background, political background, and the major writers of the romantic period and their major works of arts and the criticism they got or they received. Not only the writers but the literary works also. So we have completed the poets, famous poets during romantic period. Now let us enter into the famous novelists. Out of one, we have selected Jane Austen and her Pride and Prejudice novel. So let us first understand the life of Jane Austen. Jane Austen, she is a novelist. Don't get confused in examination if they give you 4 options to find out who is not a poet of romantic period, and if they give you 4 options like Wordsworth, Blake, Wordsworth, Keats, Coleridge and Jane Austen. Who is not a romantic poet, Ghoshji?
Jane Austen.
Jane Austen. So Jane Austen is a novelist. Jane Austen, who is a novelist, very popular novelist during romantic period, one of the supreme novelists of the world, called by David Cecil. He says that Jane Austen is one of the supreme novelists of the world. And she was born on 16th December 1775 in Steventon is a rural village with a population of about 250 in North Hampshire, England. So it's a very small village. Her exposure is also very limited to few families. So that's where all her novels are considered to be even domestic novels also related to families, problems. Marriage is one of the major problem in all those novels. And she is the 6th child of 7. She has 5 brothers and 2 sisters. And for her, the dearest sister is Cassandra. So you need to remember, because she also has sisters and brothers. So in her novels, there will be so many characters with siblings. So the dearest sister for Jane Austen is Cassandra. The most unlearned and uninformed female who ever dared to be an authoress. Okay, Jane. The comment on Jane is, she is not highly learnt and uninformed. She doesn't know about the world. She knows only her world. What is her world? A group of families, a small place or small town where all the domestic problems and family problems, especially relationship problems, marriage, those were her themes. 3 or 4 families in a country village is the very thing of to work on. So Jane said all these things. Jane's work of arts. No open country, no fresh air, no blue hill, no bony beck is commented by Charles Bronte. She says that those are very limited, themes for the Jane Austen, because she never got exposed to the real world other than her small town and small families. Her novels are also called as tea table romances. So whatever the romances or whatever the love, falling in love, getting diverted, all those things are themes of her novels. So that's why her novels are also called tea table romance. So they can read when they want to time pass. And the marriage is the topic. What is the major topic of her all novels is marriage. How to get married is a major topic of her novels, especially in Pride and Prejudice. And the main aspect which changes the stories, twists and turns and change of dramatic events is because of the irony. It is about the irony which makes the characters to have difference of opinions and they fight. So irony plays a central stage in this novels. The young lady has a talent for describing the involvements of feelings and characters of ordinary life, which is to me the most wonderful I ever met with. So she portrays the characters in so realistic manner. For Walter Scott, who was a historical novelist, wonders about the greatness of Jane Austen to picturize the feelings and emotions of the families. Never penetrated into the deeper experience, the powerful and spiritual things in life, George Eliot comments on Jane Austen's novels and work of her. Jane Austen is very simple, straightforward writer. Whatever she has seen in her life, she has portrayed in her novels. no spirituality, no deep thoughts, just about the problems of a common woman, common man in that particular society. And she died at the age of 41 with Addison's disease. What is this? Is an uncommon disorder that occurs when your body doesn't produce enough of certain hormones. So this is a brief history about Jane Austen. Now her literary works. If you see this screen clearly, her literary works include, she had written 6 famous novels published, one novel she could not publish, and all these novels comes under the category domestic novels, and her characters are well-rounded and vibrant. There are so many famous characters in her novels which are very well known to the literary students. And Pride and Prejudice is written by Jane Austen, and the first title of the initial title of the Pride and Prejudice was First Impression. Examination point of view, this is important question. What was the earlier title given to Pride and Prejudice was First Impression. Okay, and it was written in 1796, published in 1813 after 16 years of gap. Though she completed that novel Pride and Prejudice, the First Impression, which was completed in 1796, but it got published in 1813 after 16 years of gap. And then the title Pride and Prejudice was from epilogue of Miss Burney's novel Cecilia. So Pride and Prejudice was suggested by somebody to her, and then she changed the title from First Impression to Pride and Prejudice, and the title was drawn from epilogue of Miss Burney's novel Cecilia. Then she had written Sense and Sensibility, and the initial name given to the Sense and Sensibility was Elinor and Meringham, two names of the characters, important characters, and it is an epistolary novel which was published in 1797. What do you mean by epistolary novel, Gauji?
Sir, it is a novel in the form of letters.
Correct. Epistolary novel. It was published in 1797. And very famous novel of Jane Austen, or one of the very famous novels of Jane Austen, was Emma, which was published in 1814. Then she had written Mansfield Park, which was published in 1812. And she had written Northanger Abbey. Spelling is wrong. Northanger Abbey, which is a Gothic novel. She made fun of Gothic novel, Horace Walpole's novels, Northanger Abbey, and it was published in between 1798 to 1999. 1799. And then she had written Persuasion in 1815, and she was uncompleted. She could not complete the remaining part of the novels because of the Watsons. His father died, and she also died. And the last one is Lady Susan, is a novel, an epistolary novel. Again, it is in form of letters, or it is also known as a juvenile novel. It is unfinished and it is unmatured. So these are the literary works published or contributed by Jane Austen in the English literature. Now the questions comes in this way: which novel is not authored by Jane Austen? So you need to know the names of the novels and who are the author, or who is the author of the novels in Romantic period. They will just give confusion only. They will give you some novels written by other novelists during Romantic period, and you need to understand which are the novels written by Jane Austen. Now let us come to the storyline of Pride and Prejudice. Goji, did you read this Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice novel already?
Sir, actually, I read this story in my bachelor degree period. After that, I did not read the story. I forgot, but I can remember the character seeing the screen actually.
Right. So this is a book. Can you see the book, Goji? Deepti, Preeti?
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Now, why I'm again, every time whenever I start any story or any poem, I'm showing all the books to you. Correct, Goji?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Why
sir.
I'm showing? Can you explain? Can you understand why I'm showing all the books to you?
Sir, it is your important asset day by day. You just purchased and you read those books actually.
I mean to say that whatever is the syllabus for your KVS or NVS or UGC net examination, I had collected all the books and I almost all read those books. So if we don't read the text properly, they can give you any sentence from that entire text, from any part or any corner of the text. And if they ask you a question from which book, from which text these lines are extracted, or who is the writer, who is the author, then we get confused. So what I mean to say, one is we need to collect the important books and we have to read those books. There is no other option. Okay.
Sir, lines may be quoted from the novels also.
Yes.
Oh, that is really difficult. Means David Copperfield, Pride and Prejudice, Ima, Persuasion, many novels are there. So it will take lots of time to go through so many pages in a novel, sir.
For that only we have to go with the question paper practice or practice papers, so that we will get the important sentences without reading many novels. At least we need to read the important novels like Pride and Prejudice. Okay, because the question which I am going to ask, this is a very important, very popular in every competitive exams which is related to English literature. They will ask you the question. They'll ask you, which novel begins with these lines? So many times you will find these questions, which novel begins with these lines, and they will give the novel's first beginning of the lines. So at least important novels we need to read first 1 or 2 pages. Okay, now Goji, this novel, The Pride and Prejudice, begins with these lines. It is a universal truth, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. With these lines, this novel, Pride and Prejudice, begins. Goji?
Yes, sir.
So we need to
Yes,
at
sir.
least we need to remember what I'm trying to tell you. Preeti, are you there? Deepthi, am I audible? Deepthi, am I audible? Preeti?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So what I am trying to tell you all is that you need to remember so much of information. It is not like mathematics where you can calculate if you know the formula. Mostly English literature questions and examination is force you to remember and recollect in the examination. Okay, facts. The facts we need to remember. If you remember the storyline, that is little okay. If you remember the facts of the story, background of the story, the characters of the story, the criticism of the received by the story and the writer, then it will be more helpful. It is generally speaking, clearing literature examinations mostly depends upon the remembering power and the recollection capacity. You need not to calculate anything. They will give you a straightforward question, or they will give you a question from the character from the story or the lines from the story. So you need to read a lot and you need to remember and recollect, and that comes with the practice, rigorous practice. Okay, so this novel begins with these sentences. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Now let us start the novel written by Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice. Okay, now there are characters in this novel. This is the mind map I have given, and we have to go through the characters. So to ease the struggle to remember these many characters in this novel, I have given a character list also, and we will read the character here and we will identify the character. Okay, now Goji, can you see the screen clearly?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So the two major characters are the heroine or the lead character of this novel is Elizabeth Bennett. Can you see the screen? Elizabeth Bennett?
Yes, sir.
Alright. So Elizabeth Bennett, an intelligent and spirited young woman who possesses a keen wit and enjoys studying people's character. Although she initially dislikes Darcy, circumstances cause her to reassess her negative impressions of him, and she eventually falls in love with him. So the central character, the lady lead of this entire story, the protagonist of the story of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice is Elizabeth Bennett. And then we have Fitzwilliam Darcy, a wealthy, proud man who falls in love with Elizabeth and reveals a generous, thoughtful nature beneath his somewhat stiff demeanor. Now, the questions in examination comes directly from the character. Who represents pride in the Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice? Preeti. Preeti? Deepthi? What happened to this? Goji, am I audible or not?
Audible, sir.
Then tell me, who represents the pride in the novel Pride and Prejudice? Whether it is Elizabeth Bennet or Darcy?
Darcy.
Right. And who symbolizes or who shows the prejudice? Elizabeth.
Uh,
Elizabeth.
that is Elizabeth Bennett.
All right.
Yes.
And what is the first name given to this novel? First impression.
First impression. Yes.
Listen. See, first impression. Okay. First impression is the earlier title given to Pride and Prejudice because they have so many misconceptions in the first sight or when they fall into love. That is the two characters when I introduced. Elizabeth Bennet is the heroine and Darcy is the hero. Or you can go with the Elizabeth is the prejudice she has and Darcy is the pride. Let me come back. Preeti and Deepthi, if I am audible, just unmute your mic and say yes. And then we have Mr. Bennett. The next character is Mr. Right, okay, Deepthi. Mr. Bennett. Who is this Mr. Bennett? Elizabeth's ironic and often apathetic father. So, Mr. Bennett is the father of Elizabeth, and she is ironic and often apathetic father. Unhappily married, he has failed to provide a secure financial future for his wife and daughters. Then we have Mrs. Bennet, who is a very smart or over smart woman in this story. Mrs. Bennet, Elizabeth's foolish and unrestrained mother, who is obsessed with finding husbands of her daughters. So her life ambition is to find husbands to her daughters. So Mr. and Mrs. Bennet are the parents of Elizabeth Bennet. Then we have Jane Bennet. Where is Jane Bennet here in the screen? If you see, Elizabeth Bennet is here, Jane Bennet is connected here. Confide in her each other. So she is the most beloved sister for Elizabeth. Jane Bennet, a gentle and kind-hearted young woman who is Elizabeth's confidant and the oldest of the Bennet's daughter. So in exam they will ask you who is the eldest or who is the oldest or youngest daughters of Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. So you need to remember that one. So Jane Bennet is the oldest of her sisters. Jane Bennet, a gentle and kind-hearted young woman who is Elizabeth's confidant and the oldest of Bennet's daughter. And if they gave you a question who is very close to Elizabeth among her sisters, it is Jane Bennet. And she falls in love with Bingley. Bingley is also one of the important characters. So Jane falls in love with Bingley, but is cautious about revealing the depth of her feelings for him. So all these pairs will be there. So many pairs will come. Who had fallen in love with whom? You need to remember in this story. Then we have Mary Bennet. Where is Mary Bennet here? If not okay. Mary Bennet, the pretentious third Bennet daughter who prefers reading over socializing. So they'll ask you a question. What is the name of Mrs. and Mr. Bennet's daughter who always interested in reading over socializing? So it is Mary Bennet. Then we have Catherine, nickname is Kitty Bennet, the Bennet's peevish fourth daughter who joins her sister Lydia in filtering with soldiers. And next if you go, Lydia Bennet, the Bennet's immature and irresponsible youngest daughter, Mrs. Bennet's favorite. She shocks the family by running away with Wickham. So now coming back to some information. How many sisters are in this story or in this novel? Goji?
Five sisters.
Right, 5 sisters. And what are the names of those sisters? We'll go in a correct according to the age. Jane is the oldest. Correct?
Yes, sir.
And then after Jane, who comes? Elizabeth comes. Second. Yes or no, Goji?
Yes, sir. Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kid, Lydia.
Jane, Elizabeth. And after Elizabeth, third one is Mary Bennet. And then fourth one is Catherine Kitty or Catherine Bennet. And the last one is Lydia. 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 So this is the sequence. Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, then Catherine and Lydia. Because in exam they may ask you these questions also. Sometimes we can't expect what type of questions do they ask. They may give you the names of the daughters and they will ask you to find out the right order, or they may give you the characters whom they married and they may give you in disorder, and you may have to find out who Jane married to whom, Elizabeth married to whom, Mary married to whom, Catherine and Lydia. Or they will ask you a question, who eloped or who ran away from the with White Wickman, that is Lady Bennett. So these kind of questions may look funny, but those kind of questions may also come in exam. And then we have Charles Bingley, a good natured and wealthy man who falls in love with Jane. So Jane is the eldest daughter of Mrs. and Mr. Bennett, who is a very close confidant or friend of Elizabeth, and she had fallen in love with Charles Bingley. And who is Charles Bingley? A good natured and wealthy man who falls in love with Jane. He is easily influenced by others. His sisters influenced him very much, especially by his close friend Darcy also. So who is Darcy? Darcy had fallen in love with Elizabeth Bennet, and Elizabeth Bennet's elder sister Jane Bennett had fallen in love with Charles Bingley, and Charles Bingley's close friend is Darcy. So all these connections we have to remember. Then we have Caroline Bingley, Bingley's shallow and hasty sister, Caroline Bingley, who befriends Jane and later snubs her. She attempts to attract Darcy. So who is this Darcy? Darcy is the love of Elizabeth Bennet. But this girl, Caroline Bingley, also wants to marry Darcy. So triangular love story forms. She attempts to attract Darcy's attentions and is jealous when Darcy is instead drawn to Elizabeth. So she was unhappy because Darcy got attracted instead of her to Elizabeth, and she was not happy with the Charles Bingley's attraction towards Jane because she wanted to marry Darcy, and Darcy was drawn towards Elizabeth, and her brother Charles Bingley was attracted to Elizabeth Bennet's sister Jane Bennett. So she was not happy with the proceeding. So she wanted to create some kind of misunderstanding between Charles Bingley and Jane Bennett. Then next characters are Mr. and Mrs. Hertz, Bingley's snobbish sister and brother-in-law. Mrs. Hertz spends most of her time gossiping with Caroline, while Mr. Hertz does little more than playing cards and sleep. And then we have one more character, George Wickham, a handsome and personable fortune hunter to whom Elizabeth is initially attracted. So when George Wickham came into the story, he attracts Elizabeth by speaking something wrong and bad about Darcy. He eventually runs off with and is forced to marry Lydia, though he got attracted to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth also got initially attracted to this George Wickham. Finally, this George Wickham eloped with Lydia and he marries Lydia. Lydia is the youngest daughter or youngest sister of Elizabeth. Then we have Lady Catherine and de Brogue, Darcy's arrogant aunt. So Darcy has an arrogant aunt who dominates Mr. Collins and entertains hopes that her daughter will marry Darcy. So there is one more aunt, Lady Catherine. She wanted her daughter to become wife of Darcy. So everything is about marriage. One character, another character, three more characters, all they want to get married, and in between some characters wanted to marry the other characters, but the other characters love some other characters. That is the confusion of the story. But I will explain the story in so easy fashion so that you will understand finally who married whom. Mrs. de Broglie, Lady Catherine's sickly, bland daughter. So Lady Catherine's daughter is Miss de Brogue, and she is bland daughter, and she wanted to marry Darcy, but Darcy wanted to marry Elizabeth, and Mrs. Bingley, who is the sister of Charles Bingley, wanted to marry Darcy. So all these things may confuse in the beginning, but once you complete at least the reading of the summary and finally who married whom, then the confusion may come out. Then we have Colonel Fitzwilliam Darcy's well-mannered and pleasant cousin, who is interested in Elizabeth. So there are so many people who were charmed by Elizabeth's beauty and witty nature. So all these are fallen in love with Elizabeth. So Colonel Fitzwilliam Darcy's well-mannered and pleasant cousin, who is interested in Elizabeth but who needs to marry someone with money. And then we have Georgian Darcy, Darcy's shy but warm-hearted sister. Okay, so her name is Georgian Darcy. Then we have Mr. Collins, Mr. Bennett's ridiculous cousin, who will inherit Longbourn after Mr. Bennett's death. Upon Lady Catherine de Brogue's recommendation, he seeks a bright, first proposing to Elizabeth. So who first proposed to Elizabeth is Mr. Colin, and then to Charlotte Lucas. Then who is this Charlotte Lucas? Charlotte Lucas, Elizabeth's sensible and intelligent friend. So Charles Lucas is friend of Elizabeth, who is very sensible and intelligent, who disappoints Elizabeth by marrying Mr. Collins for money and security. So this man, Mr. Collins, marries at the end of the story Charlotte Lucas. Who is this Charles Lucas? She is the friend of Elizabeth. Then we have Sir William and Lady Lucas, Charlotte's parents and Bennett's neighbors. So Charlotte Lucas' parents are Sir William and Lady Lucas, and they are also neighbors of Bennett. And then finally we have few more characters. Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, Mrs. Bennett's intelligent and cultivated brother and sister-in-law. Then we have Mr. and Mrs. Phillips, a country attorney and his vulgar wife, who is Mrs. Bennett's sister. So these are the relationships between all the characters. Though it may sound very confusing in the beginning of the story with the characters introduction, but once you read the summary of the story, once you understood who married whom finally, then this kind of confusion may end. So Goji, is it little confusing or very much confusing about the characters and the relationship between different
very much confusing, sir. It got puzzled in my brain. Means so many characters are there, I can't understand the relationship in between them. Elizabeth is attracted by many male person, but actually I'm getting confused with the persons. Actually, means I need to go through the text once again. Otherwise, I can't remember those relationships. Sir.
We can't find fault with Elizabeth because she is so charming and beautiful, so she attracted many men. Okay.
No, that is not the problem. Problem is to remember the characters and their relationship actually.
Right. Dipti, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, after introduction of all the characters, let us make things very easy so that you can understand this summary. Okay. So, Pride and Prejudice, romantic novel by Jane Austen, published anonymously in 3 volumes in 1813. Remember, she had not written the name of herself in the publication of the book. It is published anonymously. Pride and Prejudice, romantic novel by Jane Austen, published anonymously in 3 volumes in 1813. It was published with the name of Jane Austen, but who published we don't know. Anonymously in 3 volumes. The first novels are published in 3 volumes in 1813. A classic of English literature, written with incisive wit and superb character delineation. Of course, it is a very superb character delineation explanation, but for us it is very confusing because there are so many characters in her novels. It centers on the burgeoning relationship between Elizabeth Bennet, the daughters of a country gentleman, and the Fitzwilliam Darcy, a rich aristocratic landowner. Upon publication, Pride and Prejudice was well received by critics and readers. The first edition sold out within the first year and it never went out of print. So this is the introduction about the novel Pride and Prejudice. Now, the summary of the novel, I will be as simple and easy so that you will not get confused with the storyline of the Pride and Prejudice. The novel opens with one of the most famous lines in English literature. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Who said this statement? The statement is seemingly what Mrs. Bennett thinks. So it is given by Mrs. Bennett, who is the mother of 5 daughters, and Elizabeth is one of her daughters, and Elizabeth is the second daughter of Mr. and Mr. Bennett. So Mrs. Bennett thinks as she sets her sights on the newly arrived Bingley. So this Bingley arrives near her place, who she is sure will make a suitable husband for one of her daughters. So she is not clear who will attract Mrs. Bingley. At least she wanted one of her daughters to become Mrs. Bingley's wife. Who is sure will make a suitable husband for one of her daughters. At ball, so they all went to a ball, a dance party. Bingley takes an immediate interest in the beautiful and shy Jane. When Bingley saw Jane, he fell in love with that girl, and because she was looking very beautiful and little shy. So Bingley got attracted to Jane. The encounter between his friend Darcy and Elizabeth is less cordial. In the same ball or in the same party, in the same room, Darcy also looked at Elizabeth. Elizabeth also looked at Darcy, but Darcy's behavior was so proud in nature. Though he was good, kind-hearted person inside, but he was showing his arrogance, or what you call now the proudness of being a rich man. The encounter between his friend Darcy and Elizabeth is less cordial. Although Austen shows them intrigued by each other, she reverses the convention of the first impressions. The pride of rank, Darcy, and the fortune and prejudice against the social inferiority of Elizabeth's family hold Darcy aloof, because he always says that Elizabeth and her family comes from the lower status of the society, where he has come from the higher levels of the society, financially, economically, the connections of the family decides, while the pride of self-respect and prejudice against Darcy's snobbery hold Elizabeth equally aloof. So they, though they get attracted, but their family backgrounds make them to feel pride and prejudiced, and that is the reason why they don't get attracted, they don't start the love story in a very well manner. We can understand.
Sir, what is the meaning of the exact meaning of the word of prejudice?
Prejudice means having some kind of a wrong ideas about others.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
Prejudice, like you may be a good person, but I prejudice or I feel that you are a bad person because of your either your behavior or the manners or something which made me to feel that you are not a good person. And
Okay,
Elizabeth character is prejudiced because of Darcy's proud behavior. Okay, the pompous Colin soon arrives, hoping to marry one of the Bennett's sisters. Mrs. Bennett steers him towards Elizabeth, but the latter refuses his offer of marriage. He instead becomes engaged to her friend Charlotte. So this Collins already told you, he first got attracted to Elizabeth, but Mrs. Bennett was not interested in Collins, and he was drawn to Elizabeth's friend Charlie. He instead becomes engaged to her friend Charlie. During this time, Elizabeth encounters the charming Wickham. So Wickham is the one who was against Darcy and who told so many wrong things about Darcy, who did to his father and to him. And initially Elizabeth got attracted to Wickham. There is a mutual attraction between the two, and he informs her that Darcy has denied him his inheritance. So he told a story about Darcy which made Elizabeth to believe that Wickham is true and Darcy is an evil person. So what happens in the story when they went to a ballet or dance party? Bingley danced with Jane, who is the elder sister of Elizabeth, and even Darcy and Elizabeth wanted to dance, but his arrogance made Elizabeth to refuse dancing with Darcy. After these things, what happened? Bingley went back to London. After Bingley abruptly departs for London, Elizabeth's dislike of Darcy mounts as she becomes convinced that he is discouraging Bingley's relationship with Jane. So she prejudiced, or she believed that Darcy is the one who is causing friction and conflict, or differences between his sister Jane and William Bingley. So she thought that Darcy is the one who is actually spoiling the relationship between her sister and Bingley. She becomes convinced that he is discouraging Bingley's relationship with Jane. Darcy, however, has grown increasingly fond of Elizabeth, admiring her intelligence and vitality. Initially, Darcy was very proud and he insulted or humiliated Elizabeth's humble family beginnings, roots, and then slowly he got attracted. Elizabeth sees Darcy while visiting the now married Charlie. Elizabeth sees Darcy. So finally, this person who came to Collins, he married to Elizabeth's friend Charlie. So in that party, Elizabeth sees Darcy, who possesses his love for her and proposes. So Elizabeth first proposal, when Darcy proposed to Elizabeth first time, she got surprised. A surprised Elizabeth refuses his offer, and when Darcy demands an explanation, she accuses him of breaking up Jane and Bingley and denying Wickham his inheritance. So when Darcy proposed, she controlled her pride, she calmed down his pride and all those things, and he proposed to Elizabeth. Elizabeth was also got little shocked and surprised that Darcy was interested on her, but when she received the proposal, she refused or rejected his proposal. When Darcy got hurt and asked an explanation, she says that he was the one who has created difference between his friend Bingley and her sister Jane, and she says that he was the one for the Wickham's inheritance of his property. Then Darcy tried to convince her. Darcy tries to remove the confusion in the mind of Elizabeth. So he had written letters. So Darcy subsequently writes Elizabeth a letter in which he explains that he separated the couple largely because he did not believe Jane returned Bingley's affection. So he thought that Jane is not the right woman for his friend Bingley. He also discloses that Wickham, after squandering his inheritance, tried to marry Darcy's then 15 years old sister in an attempt to gain possession of her fortune. So he even revealed the real character of Wickham, and how Wickham tries to seduce his 15 years old sister to gain the possession of her fortune. With these revelations, Elizabeth begins to see Darcy in a new light. So I told you the irony plays a crucial role or central role stage in her novels. So all these misconceptions, misunderstandings happened between Darcy and Elizabeth came to an end or came to stop when Darcy wrote a letter to Elizabeth revealing all the characters, intentions, and why he was in between Darcy's friend Bingley and Elizabeth's sisters Jane. So when he wrote a letter and when Elizabeth read that letter, all those misconceptions and wrong ideas about each other came to an end. Shortly thereafter, the youngest Bennett sister Lydia elopes with Wickham. So when they were trying to establish a proper relationship, this last girl of the Mrs. and Bennets, or Elizabeth's youngest sister Lydia, was influenced by Wickham and she eloped with Wickham. The news is met with great alarm by Elizabeth, since the scandalous affair, which is unlikely to end in marriage. So she understood that Wickham eloped with Lydia and he may not ready to marry this young lady. Then she sought the help of Darcy, which is unlikely to end in marriage, could ruin the reputation of other Bennet sisters. When she tells Darcy, she persuaded Wickham to marry Lydia, offering him money. So Darcy came in between and he convinced Wickham to marry Elizabeth's youngest sister Lydia. So he offered him money. Despite Darcy's attempt to keep his intervention a secret, Elizabeth learns of his actions. So Darcy doesn't want to expose himself in this act, but finally Elizabeth came to know that how Darcy helped her family to have this kind of name and fame and without dishonoring their family's name. At the encouragement of Darcy, Bingley subsequently returns and he and Jane become engaged. So at the end of the story, Darcy motivated or encouraged, said something positive about Jane and her family. So finally Bingley, again he also got so much of listen nonsense from his sisters, but finally he came back, he returns and he got engaged to Jane. Finally Darcy proposes again to Elizabeth in his second proposal, who this time Elizabeth accepts his proposal. So at the end of the story, who married whom we will try to understand. Then only it will be easy for you. Can you see the screen, Goji?
Yes, sir.
So Jane Elizabeth or Jane Bennett is the eldest. Who married Jane? It is Bingley. Goji.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Who married Jane? It is
Bingley.
Who is Bingley? Bingley is the close friend of Darcy, or Darcy is the closest friend of Bingley. समझ में आ गया? Goji.
Yes, sir.
Don't get confused. I'll explain the entire relation slowly now. So Jane fell in love with Bingley. Bingley fell in love with Jane, and they both got married at the end of the story. समझ में आ गया आपको?
Yes, sir.
Right. Next sister is Elizabeth. Elizabeth got married to Darcy. Who is this Darcy? He is a friend of Bingley. What is the relation between Darcy and Bingley?
Friendship.
And Darcy married whom? Elizabeth.
Yes.
Right. And now, who married Lydia at the end of the novel?
Wickham.
So Wickham eloped with Lydia and he married to Lydia only after convinced by Darcy. समझ में आ गया गोजी?
Sir, who convinced?
Darcy. Wickham eloped with Lydia, correct?
Yes.
And Elizabeth suspected that Wickham may not marry Lydia. So when this news reached to Darcy, Darcy persuaded or convinced or negotiated the matter and made Wickham to marry Lydia. When Wickham agreed to marry Lydia, Elizabeth got impressed by Darcy's action and she accepted his second proposal, or second time when he proposed, Elizabeth accepts. So the story ends with Jane marrying Bingley and Elizabeth marrying Darcy and Lydia marrying Wickham. समझ में आ गया?
Yes, sir. हाँ, समझ में आ गया, sir.
So the storyline is very simple. All these women who are unmarried, they wanted to find a partner, and Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, their main purpose or their sole ambition or her sole ambition, Mrs. Bennett's sole ambition in her life is to get a suitable husbands for her all 5 daughters. Okay, so Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Catherine and Lydia, these are the 5 sisters in the story. Goji.
Yes, sir. I need to go through the text once again.
I'll help you out. Deepti, are you there? Deepti? Right, fine.
Yes, sir.
Deepti ma'am, tell me, what are the names of the 5 sisters in this family?
Jane Bennett, Elizabeth Bennett, Mary Bennett, Catherine or Kitty Bennett, and Lydia Bennett.
Who married whom at the end of the story?
Jane married
Bingley.
Fitzwilliam Darcy. And Jane married Bennett.
Bingley.
Bingley, and Elizabeth married Fitzwilliam Darcy.
Your son is not well? Deepti?
Not one.
Right, okay, fine. It's okay. Right. So this this novel has only one problem. There are too many characters, and these too many characters have too many relationships. So questions in exam, they will not ask you who wrote this novel, Pride and Prejudice. They will ask you questions from the relationships. Okay. So Goji?
Yes, sir.
So once you go through the notes provided to you, and the questions comes in the same format, that who married whom, or who is the first love of whom, such kind of questions may come from this story, and it is a novel. No need to read the entire novel, but at least if you read few pages, you will get to know the characters and all those things. Okay, so this is from my side. It is 7:54. Then if you have any questions, you can ask me from this novel, Pride and Prejudice, written by Jane Austen.